Okay, I had a few more thoughts that I wanted to share before they got away from me. So again, I have a much bigger map, and I'm hoping to have like a more comprehensive discussion of this, but I wanted to sort of at least share this out because as we're, comparing pieces of the puzzle and surfacing new elements for consideration. Anyway, I'll lay these out on the card table and see what you guys think. So a lot of this idea of playing the game, going in the room, doing the synthetic telepathy Pong thing, that was based on that Lauren Carpenter video from 1991. Okay, so they've probably known this well before with the Macy conferences and the Society for Psychical Research in the late 19th century, but definitely throughout the 70s and then into the 90s with cloud-based computing. They knew that like synthetic telepathy energy fields were a thing, and that's the Institute for Noetic Sciences. And again, that's why it's very important that the early conversations around community currencies took place at ions, because it's actually a consciousness field associated with values, which we want to imagine is about money and economics, but it actually the valuing is internal, and it's about our own consciousness and what our values tell us about our reality and how our archetype within the field at play in the live action role play field. So this value-based axiometry is really central, and that's why I think looking back, you can see why we're inhabiting this era of like profound culture warness, right? It's like, what is your identity? Like, wear it on your sleeve and, be intersectional, and then have all of these different pieces laid out so that we know what kind of hero you are in this game. And so the values are all part of the equation. So Lauren Carpenter, and if you haven't seen that clip, like go back and look up Loren Carpenter on my blog about going in and playing Pong with a group of people where you have essentially a consensus that is unspoken, that is attained energetically in real time to play this game, right? And so Lauren Carpenter, he's now at IONS, the Institute for Noetic Science. He has been for some time as one of their lead scientists. But previously, I think he started at Boeing doing simulation modeling, and then he became co-founder of Pixar. Now, remember, Edwin Catmull and Jason and I have talked about the context of Utah and the emergence of how the whole milieu of Utah and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints overlaps with Disney, and through Edwin Catmull, Pixar, right? So Pixar was Catmull and Carpenter, and I know like it went on a side trip through George Lucas Industrial Light and Magic, and then before becoming part of the Disney fold and Pixar. But this is important because in the last video, I talked a lot about how we position ourselves in this live action role play, and the shorthand version is most of us want to be a hero, right? Like, not that we're presuming we're great and we're going to be the heroes, but like you want to be the good guy, right? And so we're constantly positioning ourselves and like scanning the landscape to figure out good, bad, where am I? I'm the hero, I'm doing the good thing. Unless, again, there's a small percentage of people who want to be the bad guy, but most of us are trying to be the hero. And so again, the whole Pixar Disney ethos builds towards all the different kinds of archetypal heroes. And this overlaps with Jung. This is a lot about, this goes back to Bobby and the San Patrignano and the Jung stuff. So Lauren Carpenter is embedded in Pixar. And if you look on the link to the clip I have like a 1979 clip that Lauren Carpenter developed, which is fractal geometry of a landscape. So soaring through these snow-covered cliffs. And again, it's pretty basic, but for 1979, pretty sophisticated stuff, right? And you're soaring around, and then it turns into some sort of psychedelic color wheel and fractal, spinning triangles and electric lights. And then it goes back out into the landscape. And then at the beginning and the end is literally a teapot. And that is the Utah teapot. And that is you should look it up. If you don't know Utah teapot, that should be part of our core conceptual vocabulary. The Utah teapot was the first virtual object that was put into the internet, right? So to begin the metaverse as an object-oriented programming artifact. Now, why was it a teapot, right? Well, the guy who put the teapot in there was British. So you could imagine that because British people like tea, so it was a teapot, right? But he bought the teapot at I can't remember if it was like Zion's Cooperative, like the old LDS, like cooperative department store downtown. This was in the 70s. like he and his wife, and they had this teapot, and that's what he modeled because it had this certain kind of curves that were important mathematically to have the curves and the handle and the spout, and it was complex. So that's the story behind the teapot. But what I'm realizing is that, again, there's the trickiness of symbology and language. And this is something, I talked about with Jason in a session that's going to be coming up. But the semiotics and the symbolism, and then there's layers, right? There's superficial layers, and then there's deeper layers. And so I'm realizing, ultimately the teapot, I believe, and I've talked about that in the previous conversation that we had unpacking Catmull and Pixar and Disney and the LDS Church, but that it's actually Alice. It's that kind of tea party. It's the Mad Hatter's tea party. And if you try on the lens, and again, this is me, you don't have to pick up this lens if you don't want to, or you could pick it up and see what you think, right, for a while and put it back down if you don't like it, right? But the lens that I'm picking up is that this is an interdimensional ant computer that particularly is interested in children and maybe the elderly because they have a different relationship to the field than grown-ass people that have a lot of language and have a lot of rigid ideas about what the world is, right? That people experiencing dementia and children and maybe people who are in states of non-traditional mental states are all in the field, and so therefore interesting as channels to get whatever they're after. Now, again, the Carpenter video, what are you doing? You're navigating a landscape. You're flying. In fact, Vol Libre is the title of the video. And I looked up, well, what is Vol Libre? And it's free flight. So you're doing this free flight. And then you're flying from what looks like a material landscape into a virtual landscape of color and shape. And this is something I've talked briefly about with Emily Moyer, is this idea of sound, time, and geometry. I might not have all of the things lined up, but essentially sort of the sacred geometry. So, right, you're through a landscape, you're into color, you're into the sacred geometry, you have electricity, right? You have pulsed electricity, and then you come back out. And so I think that my take on this one, as I'm trying on this lens, is that the goal is to get us to practice and to discipline our consciousness and our bodies to go on demand into like remote viewing states or altered states to access the field and to bring stuff back, to navigate, to go in, to get to the place, to get the information individually or collectively, and then to bring it out and make it available to some system at large for some goal that I don't know what the goal is. And so this navigating the landscape, the navigation is really important. So you've got the teapot. So think about, what is the Alice in Wonderland story? Like Lewis Carroll was part of the Society for Psychical Research, right? Like all the stuff I've been talking about with like the Curies and piezoelectricity and crystals. Well, all that milieu was also with Lewis Carroll and Arthur Conan Doyle and Arthur Balfour, who helped create the State of Israel, the Prime Minister of the UK, like very important people, part of the Society for Psychical Research. And then they came and they had a branch in the United States, and J.B. Ryan was part of that. And that's where parapsychology got installed at Duke as a science, not as some sort of fringy thing, but as literally applying hard science to parapsychology and interdimensional communication. Okay. So, and I feel like later that expanded much more broadly through Alfred Loomis's work in Tuxedo Park, New York. And then eventually that got folded into the MIT Rad Lab. And then eventually that got folded back into Silicon Valley and then melded with Eastern meditation and mysticism and Maya, the Grand Illusion. So it's this long sort of wandering trajectory, but it tethers back into interdimensional communication and pattern seeking. So we have Alice, right? The story character Alice, who goes through all of these transformative experiences, right? Physical, shrinking, being tall, getting small, the mushrooms and the Mad Hatter and the world being inverse and upside down. I think that is a child, to me, that symbolizes the child being used as a channel to these other realities that are not on the surface of the material world as we know them. So I've seen some things online that are essentially appear to be melding the idea of RFK Jr. candidacy with Rand Paul. And they're like, yeah, that's all we need. It's this great blend of liberalism and conservatism and like freedom, and we like this. And so it's sort of being seeded into the consciousness of people, like, oh, that would be a ticket. Yeah, like Rand Paul and Bobby, and that might work, right? Because again, people still think that somehow the electoral system is going to be part of the answer, but that's the story that they're in. But it's interesting, and this is something that had not occurred to me at all until someone brought it to my attention, was that ultimately, I forgot that Rand Paul was an ophthalmologist. And so I have a whole section of work that I have to sort of surface about lipids and controlling our senses controlling us. And I mentioned this previously, in our reality. If there's this holographic, the brain is like holographic, and we're part of the everything everywhere all at once multiverse, then the sensing is really important, and your eyes are probably of those senses really important, because again, seeing is believing. A picture is worth 1,000 words, right? The eyes are the windows of the soul. And I didn't realize that the retina, the optic nerve, of course, grows from the brain out. So it's the interior consciousness reaching outward, right? It's making that bridge. And the retina has its own protective barrier. So you've got the blood-brain barrier for the brain, and then you've got the same for the retina, because they're like, we got this under control, guys. This person is in this reality, right? But now other stuff, distraction, keep out. Don't mess with the equipment. We've got this, like, we're in this space. And that is connected to lipids and optics and photonics and light, and how we're all processing things. So it's interesting to me because, again, Rand Paul would be, with his background in eye medicine, would probably be privy to at least some of these ideas, especially somebody of his position and prominence, around how the brain works and consciousness and how it relates to one's eyes. And I know Emily has done work around eyes, and this ophthalmologist person that, I encountered, I'm like, why is this person an Ashoka fellow and he's an ophthalmologist? Because eyes are important. Now, I will say, for people who are thinking about like supplement choices, it's just come to my attention that hydroxychloroquine, actually, if you look it up, one of the problems with hydroxychloroquine is it damages your retina. It can cause eye damage. That there's toxicity related specifically to the eyes and the retina. Now, when I was doing ed tech, I couldn't quite figure out why they kept putting kids on devices that would be compromising the eyes, right? Why would you do virtual reality? Why would you do all the blue light screening? Are they there to damage your eyes? Are they there to replace your actual eyes with some other eyes? And I feel like now, like, of course, no one wants to imagine a world that would intentionally damage part of our core piece of our biology for some other purpose. But if you imagine an interdimensional and computer, multiverse and computer, collective and computer, that you would actually want to create environmental conditions where people's natural eyesight is compromised, and then you can replace it with some sort of augmented eyesight that would be prone to pushing people into these other spaces, right? And so beyond just all of the blue light and the screen-based harm and the virtual reality harm and that sort of thing on the eyes, it's very interesting to me that hydroxychloroquine is known to have toxicity specifically to the retina. So you can look that up, but that's a thing, right? So if you're going for your survival kit, right? And I know there's people out there who are like, we're not doing fear-based stuff. We're not doing, people who are doing fear porn are just terrible. We're just offering a happy world. And then I would say, if that's your frame, why are you pitching survival kits? Because that's kind of, essentially, you have a product that's predicated on there's going to be some sort of disaster that you need a survival kit for. To me, that's sort of low-key, at least fear framing. But yeah, so if you're picking up a survival kit that's full of hydroxychloroquine, or these, be mindful of your eyes, because they're after the retina. They're after dialing you in and out of what you perceive as your current reality. Because again, the goal is that we would collectively, through swarm stigmergic navigation, go into the, like Lauren Carpenter's field, through the mountaintops, and then into that prismatic light-based space to interface with the triangles and get the information and bring them back out. And someone asked me, like, what did I think about the whole psychedelics And yeah, I mean, the goal is to be in another state of consciousness, whether that's through meditation, whether that's through mental breaks, whether that's through psychedelics, whether that's in dream states. That altered state is, in my opinion, the desired area, and we already do it. I think someone else was saying like, oh, I think, yeah, I think I was asking sort of like, for it'd be nice to be able to have some like synthetic telepathy. And in retrospect, and I don't always, because some of this stuff is off the cuff, but I think we already do this. I mean, I think it's pretty well documented that we do this already, maybe not at scale and maybe not coordinated. So the consensus mechanism of the red and green paddle of the tokens is, in my opinion, an attempt to take something that we naturally have in an intimate way, writ large across the globe, which would be the noosphere. Okay, so yeah, so the Rand Paul also being part of the Tea Party, right? And so a lot of this freedom economy that's coming is talking about, it's framed as freedom, right? We're conservative values, and we're doing the freedom thing, right? And of course, the Tea Party has been the lead into this for some time, the Tea Party. And I would assume most conservatives would automatically think like Boston Tea Party, like we're the rebels fighting for our freedom, fighting the man, fighting the crown to do our own thing, right? It's the Boston. We want to drink our tea without an extra tax on it. We're anti-government taxation. But what if the Tea Party was actually an Alice Tea Party? What if it was the Mad Hatter Tea Party? And I think within this construct, I think it's much more likely that what we're dealing with is a Mad Hatter Tea Party that would channel children through ed tech and nutraceuticals and EEG monitors and behavior tokens. And those behavior tokens would probably be framed as freedom tokens, right? Like the PBIS, social emotional learning stuff that's happening, that's being framed as woke. Well, that's a community currency, right? That's the community currencies that the freedom people are going to have, only they're going to call them the freedom currencies, right? And so just be mindful of the whole linguistic framing. Again, I'm not sure that word means what you think it means, or that word can mean more than one thing. So this just gets back to the last thing I want to mention is, it just occurred to me, I've talked previously about Stephen Newcomb's work about the dome, and that around indigenous sovereignty, and the idea that if you agree to the terms to live under the dome, then you will have certain freedoms granted to you. And that's, again, the indigenous people. Like if you would agree to live under the terms of colonized Western culture settlement, and have your kids taken away to residential boarding schools and their hair cut and told not to speak their language because language is powerful, then you will have some freedoms under the dome, right? And you can have our Liberty Bell and whatever. But if you don't actually agree to go under the dome, then essentially, the power of the military, the largest military in the world, will be, chasing you, because everyone has to be under the dome. It's kind of like everyone has to go to the SIGGRAPH conference. Now, you might not have to go to pick a session and go in and pick up the paddle, but the conference is the same as the dome. You're supposed to go under there. And if you don't, that's a problem. And they're going to deal. The plan is to deal with that problem. Although it could be, the more I think about it, in the dealing with the problem, it might not just be like, we're here to squinch you out. It might just be like, oh, we're going to give you smart shoes, and maybe we'll plant some smart clothes off in the thing, or maybe we'll leave a rowboat, which is part of that Ira Levin book, the Perfect Day, because they know that there will be dissidents. Actually, in some ways, the dissidents are the most interesting. So they just want to keep an eye on the dissidents. So they're not trying to kill them. They're just trying to like watch them and figure them out, because there's a lot of interesting information that comes out of the dissidents as well. So I was thinking about freedom in terms of the dome. And someone else commented on the previous video that they were doing some sort of science fiction write-up. And I had said, oh, you should look at Daniel Suarez's. So he has a pair of books, and I don't know what you call a pair of books, what's the 2-book version of a trilogy, whatever the 2-book version is. One is called Daemon, Daemon, which I always thought was about the printers, like these little programs running in the background that just sit there until you tell them what to do. But now I realize that daimon is the oracle, right? The channel between you and the gods. So it could also be that. So that's the first one. And then the second one is freedom. And I just always sort of struggled with these two books because I thought they were very interesting. And at the time, I was still very situated strongly with my identity in one, the sort of more left political ideology. But I was like, wait a minute, is this libertarian? Am I supposed to like this? Am I not supposed to like this? Like, what? I wanted people to read it so I could talk with them about it. And I won't say it's great literature, but it was very compelling, right? And so this second book is called Freedom. And I never really thought, so this guy was a sys administrator computer, and he was self-published, and this became very important. It became I don't know if it's a bestseller, but it got published, and it was within certain circles very influential. And you can go to the P2P Foundation website and put in Daniel Suarez and Demon and Freedom, and it talks about a lot of these emerging technologies and essentially decentralized societies where the quote unquote resistance is centered in like a 3D makerspace town in Iowa, right? And it blends all of the robotics and tokens and decentralization. And again, when I was encountering this was probably like 2017. So I didn't know all the things I know now. But freedom in that context, in mathematically, there's something called degrees of freedom. And as I said, I've been looking at the 8-episode series on Netflix called Maniac and adding this to my map. And I've been going back and forth with Steffers, and we've been trading like insights on, it's just heavily encoded if you know what to look. And there's like layers of encoding. There's superficial ones, and then there's deeper and deeper ones once you start grokking what it's about. And ultimately, I think it's about quantum game theory. And ultimately, I think that's what we're in. We're into quantum game at this point. Although, again, games within games. How many quantum games? I don't know. But there's some quantum game going on. And so a lot of the aspects, even to the point of this man being sort of outcast from his family. There's a strange scene where he's with his brother's fiance, and they're in the family living room off to the side, and there's a family portrait, and he's left out. So it's a group portrait of the family, and then it's a big sofa-sized painting, and then maybe 4 feet outside of it is his painting by himself, and he's the outsider of the family. And I'm looking at that, and I'm thinking, that's actually about set theory. These are units. This is computation. And so throughout the series, we're seeing more and more things that are about physics equations and quantum, but we do, that they're oddball things. And the whole series is just odd. So you just think, oh, that's just another odd thing. But once you have the lens of that, this is abstract mathematical theory being played out in a live action role play, like that is actually the embodiment of this thing that I think is happening. It is social computation. It is catharsis. It is conflict. I was just actually talking with someone, and I had what I thought was kind of an interesting idea. And I know that Emily has been navigating some stuff, Emily Moyer, around chemistry. And so I feel like the archetypes and the values and the projection of your identity, and then having that digital twin backstory attached to it, is almost like you could imagine that the archetypes are like elements in the periodic table. And that this alchemy, like this soul alchemy that is being done, that is going to feed into this quantum psychiatry, is almost like you would have a recipe, or I don't know what recipes are called in people who are doing science experiments, but you would pull together certain molecular components, and then you would have a catalyst for a certain reaction. And I think that's what social media actually is that they've dialed in these archetypes and like, I need this. So I need a few of those and a couple of these and like a wild card. And then I need this catalytic element to like make something a manifest. And then all of the recipe is sort of, instead of like, I just made some banana bread or whatever, instead of like a half a cup of sugar and 3 bananas or whatever, is like you've got tokens, and then the tokens are part of the recipe that's pulling together like us, like our lived emotional experiences as chemistry, as like molecules. And the social physics is literally like somewhere between magic and a cooking show, and that's what social media is. It's like one ongoing buffet after another, like just unfolding on the down on the table. To what end? I don't know. Like, again, I don't know what the processing is. So anyway, so freedom, back to freedom and this idea of degrees of freedom, because I was looking at a while back, this guy democracy prep. It was a charter school. And again, way back when I was at like one of the, you've got these nested games, and I was like down here in the like, I'm fighting charter schools, right? Because charter schools are a problem. And you don't know because you're kept in this little space, like charter schools are the problem. That's the same way as the health freedom people. They're like, this thing is a problem. This thing is a problem. And they have no idea how big it goes up here because as long as you can keep them in this space, they're really good for the recipe. Because when you need some of that vanilla or baking soda or whatever, like they're available, you can just mix them in. But once they start bubbling up and getting loosey-goosey, you can't really rely on them being good for your recipe because they're not reliable as an ingredient anymore. They're too volatile, right? Like you want something simple. And so anyway, so I was thinking charter schools were the problem, and I was looking at democracy prep. I didn't know that democracy was about the Athenian superorganism and token voting and all of these things. I didn't know that. But he was setting up a low residency prep school on a campus of a university in Vermont that had been run into the ground so that they could take it over. And this low residency was essentially training like kids from Harlem, so vulnerable populations, probably as an impact commodity. And they would take them to this hilltop campus, in Vermont and train them in virtual reality. And then after, I don't know how long they were supposed to stay, a couple weeks, and then they would go home to Harlem and then do remote learning there. And of course that expands the surveillance piece, but it was about degrees of freedom. And I'm like, degrees of freedom, like and again, democracy prep, degrees of freedom. Now, ultimately this campus thing collapsed. And I think the alumni at this school pushed back and ultimately it didn't happen. But that's what put degrees of freedom on my radar, so to speak. And so I'm just going to read here, what in Wikipedia degrees of freedom is, because I think we need to think about things more in terms of mathematical theory. So degrees of freedom in statistics. In statistics, degrees of freedom is the number of values in the final calculation of a statistic that are free to vary. Estimates of statistical parameters can be based upon different amounts of information or data. The number of independent pieces of information that go into the estimate of a parameter is called the degrees of freedom. In general, the degrees of freedom of an estimate of a parameter are equal to the number of independent scores that go into the same estimate, minus the number of parameters used as intermediary steps in the estimation of the parameter itself. So I know that seems kind of complicated, but it's about statistics and modeling, okay? And prediction, it's prediction modeling. So it's all the stuff that like Leo's been talking about with like parametric insurance and projections of disaster. It's prediction. And so I don't know if the prediction is part of the like social computational manifestation, is that the prediction is to monitor the state of the recipe or what have you, of the people involved, the agents involved, and then to whether or not it's on a trajectory to achieve the goal-oriented behavior. I haven't figured it all out, but I do think that we need to consider this idea of degrees of freedom when you're listening to this idea of the parallel freedom economy, and think, well, maybe it's actually about statistical modeling. Maybe it's about prediction modeling, and maybe it is part of this larger social physics experiment in which our biology is this hybrid computer attached to the field. And so anyway, I'm putting this forward to consider because I think oftentimes there are terms that have a high symbolic value, high polarization value, right? If you want to brand something as patriotism or the American Revolution or the American way or democracy, especially in this time in which people have been reinforced very strongly about difference, and that's the polarity that Reiser talks about in World Sensorium, that maybe there's something else going on underneath. I think all of this, we should understand that this is an emergent thing out of many, many years of military behavioral psychology research. And degrees of freedom is a part of it. So just to reiterate, think about the Tea Party as actually being an Alice in Wonderland, Mad Hatter tea party, not the Boston kind. Again, thinking about the hero, like the role of the hero archetype in sort of managing our psychology. I will say Lauren Carpenter is now at IONS, Institute for Noetic Science, that I've talked about. And IONS is a partner at this Emerald Gate Foundation. And so I definitely encourage people to look that up, because that's about, they're looking into biofields and subtle energies. And the partners on this, like, it's run by Silicon Valley Venture Capital, but the partners include University of Utah, which again goes all the way back to Catmull and Pixar and the Utah Teapot, and Stanford, and Maharishi International University, which is the Schmachtenberger, oh gosh, what's his name? The movie producer guy, the Transcendental Meditation, all of that. And like Tokyo University and TNU, that I think is like an applied research government institution in the Netherlands that Leo was familiar with. It's very high level things. It's not just loopy, oh, let me, it's, I mean, again, I'm not saying that biofield tuning is inherently loopy or unprofessional. That's not what I meant to say. But this is serious money on this stuff, right? And I think because what it is about getting into the field. So look at Emerald Gate and IONS being a part of that. And yeah, just think about the retina. Think about lipids. Think about who's pushing hydroxychloroquine, right? Who might want to like kind of screw around with your retinal. And the retinal isn't just you seeing stuff around you. It's actually how you process reality, and where is there an interest in changing how we understand reality on demand. And yeah, the freedom, like where does freedom fit into the live action role-playing game? And the degrees of freedom idea as a statistical modeling is something that you could program into your freedom coins, into your freedom wallets, into your community currencies, which I think, again, goes all the way back to Bernard Lietaer, and it goes back to Will Ruddick and Cello and Sepp Kamvar and, the sensors in the kids' shoes and Wildfire Montessori. It's about agent-based modeling. And, I really feel like the conservative movement has been inflamed to a point, the anti-woke narrative, that they're going to put on those Internet of Things sensor shoes. If you brand them with red, white, blue, they're totally going to put them on and think that they're being so out there as their own like liberty-wearing archetype heroes. And because they're not going to realize that the games are nested above them and there's other stuff going on. And, again, I'm not going to say they're stupid, because most of us don't have the time to dig into this expansive amount of information. And it could be that most people don't care. They're fine to put on the shoes, the red, white, and blue shoes, and play the game and do their money and show their values in terms of, buying, pro-life diapers and, freedom coffee or whatever they want to buy. But it is agent-based modeling. And it is something that's deeply embedded into, like, across the board, military behavioral psychology. But what is that? That's the government in line with corporate America. It's always been a public-private partnership. And the goal is the noosphere. The goal is the liquid crystalline hybrid computing system to get into the field that Sophia the robot is not getting in there. Like, the robots and the AI don't have the divine in them. They don't have that tether into the field. They don't have the intuition. No robot's going to have intuition. No robot's going to have gut instinct. They're going to have computation. They're going to have super high level, fast computation. They're not going to have the intuition. And they're not going to actually, their synthetic telepathy is the blockchain, right? Like, they don't need an intuitive informational field, because literally all of their network brains are networked together. And then that's what we're going to be feeding into, I believe, with these digital wallets, whether they're a freedom branded wallet or a central bank digital currency wallet. It's a signal. It's not really about money. It's not really, it's econophysics, biophysics, social physics. And the LARPy game is the computer. So anyway, things to think about. Yep. Definitely look up, I'll get around to this, but if you just want to do some random Googling, like lipids and schizophrenia and biomarkers for schizophrenia, super important, and how that relates to retinas and possible supplements to survival supplements that might damage your retinas. So, all right, take care, everybody.